Hey, everybody. Welcome to this bonus episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast, episode number 147 with Shaunak Roy, CEO and founder of YellowDig. Really great conversation. Always appreciate chatting about social engagement for students. And this one kind of focused on the online learning environment, which can certainly be for our fully online, hybrid, or in-person, face-to-face students. So they're doing great work over there at YellowDig. Go check them out. Connect with Shaunak and the resources that he mentioned in the show notes. We got a new partner for the show, new sponsor, an affiliate program through Kitcaster. So definitely go check out what they have to offer if you would want to be a guest on some awesome podcast to talk about whatever you would like to talk about. So you going through it, that does help out the show. So appreciate folks' support there. And yeah, we'll leave it there. We'll get to the episode. It is episode number 147, a bonus episode with Shaunak Roy. All right, we are here to talk about a topic that I'm definitely fascinated and excited to talk about, social engagements for students in online learning environments, and talk with somebody from a company that I've been seeing more and more from, YellowDig. So we will start out as we always do. If you want to introduce yourself and give a brief overview of your professional background and how you got to be where you are today.
So, Dustin, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me to this podcast. My professional background is, I would say, interesting because, this is not a typical background that you will see for EdTech founders. So what it means is that it's not that I came up in a teaching background where kind of I cut my teeth in kind of teaching in the classroom, nor I am a student who kind of just graduated and kind of want to solve a problem that I'm passionate about. My background is I spent about 15 years in the corporate world before jumping in and decided to kind of found YellowDig and solve the problem that we're solving. So when I say corporate background, so out of that about 8 or 9 years in consulting, where I was a strategy consulting, started my career back in India, worked with a variety of Indian companies, then moved to the US for my master's in engineering systems from MIT. So I did that and went back to consulting. I was in New York, working with companies, institutions in the US, around the globe for a bunch of years. Then moved into the corporate world, spent a bunch of years in various corporate roles, and then decided to kind of dedicate my life now to solve a problem in education. So mostly higher education, but we do work in K-12 and corporate training as well.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people who are in ed tech, and I think just have a variety of backgrounds, and it's like, I don't know, like there just shouldn't be any sort of prohibitive nature of just like, well, you've had to like, work at a campus or do different things to, sort of get it. I guess like there's just these different insights that can be super valuable. So yeah, but I mean, the present day working, you and your team, YellowDig, I'll let you explain a little bit about what you and your team do, what the tool is and everything. So yeah, we just want to give that brief kind of primer and explanation just so everybody knows kind of what you all are up to.
Yeah, no, happy to do that. And just one last comment on my background is, higher education is changing so rapidly right now. So the traditional ways of higher education, as we all know, is kind of not the same. Like even in the last 5 years, I've been building YellowDig. I've seen so much change that's happening. So, coming in as an outsider to a large extent, but when I say outsider, it's my background, which is outsider. We have people in our team who have spent their entire careers in higher education, who kind of, really bring in that inside perspective to various things we do. But, I would say that the outside perspective or the outside in perspective is something that I kind of find quite useful sometimes when I'm kind of interacting with our various stakeholders in higher education. Um, so you asked me like, what do we do? So we, as you kind of mentioned, is we create engaging learning communities for courses and programs. We work with over what 130 universities in the U.S. mostly, and some outside the U.S. In various other parts of the world. And what we do is that we actually help our clients build active, engaged learning communities for their programs or whatever they're offering. It could be on-ground programs as well as online programs, or increasingly we are seeing hybrid programs which are adopting our technology. So that's kind of what we do at a high level.
Got it. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I've, given the past 2 years and everything, like just seen so much more uh, interest in, or people are talking about, yeah, just the opportunities and tools and sort of methodologies for engaging students in online learning environments, which I guess just for our conversation, I think can really be applicable to a student who is fully on ground, fully online, or hybrid. A lot of their learning and engagement will still be taking place in an LMS, whether it's sort of that's exclusively kind of their exposure to the institution, to fellow students, to faculty, and staff, and things, or um, just sort of a digital representation of it. But you still want that environment to feel, yeah, just engaging, and that it is maximizing the potential there for building community. So I think just from your point of view, obviously you've committed to this work and really, invested into it. What makes, from your point of view, social engagement and learning environments so important?
Well, if you think about the traditional classroom, the traditional design of a classroom is you have the professor, teacher, sage on the stage, who is essentially interacting with their students maybe once or twice a week. It could be in a physical classroom, it could be a Zoom classroom, depending on the modality of that course. So from a student engagement standpoint, the only interaction students end up having is either they have some limited conversation within the constraint of that time of a synchronous class, or they might actually run into one of the fellow students in a study group, or maybe a hallway conversation, or once in a while maybe interact with the faculties, if there is a faculty office hour. So the challenge is that the engagement levels are quite low. So, and traditionally education is not designed around engagement, or what I would say, connectivity with the student to student, or student to the instructor. And modern technologies like learning management systems, right? LMS is not a modern tech. It has been around for 10, 15 years at least, or any other kind of Zoom or other tools that we use, which is new, but those things have been around for a while, has pretty much kind of replicated what I call as the traditional higher education model. So it's almost like a bolt on. So the professor, rather than kind of lecturing in the classroom, they will probably jump on a Zoom classroom and interact. Or rather than kind of handing out assignments or whatever they are handing out to the students in a physical classroom, they might do it through a learning management system. So what we realized is that with technology we have this opportunity to kind of reimagine how interaction happens, either synchronous interaction in the classroom environment, or a synchronous environment, or asynchronous environment. So that's how, I mean, when we say social engagement and social learning, the way we think about it is that how do we get our students more engaged with one another, with the instructor, depending on what they are looking for in that learning environment. So, and there are a variety of ways I can get into that, that way we make it happen. But broadly speaking, it's kind of almost a reimagining interaction between a student and an instructor.
Well, and I think, yeah, I'm curious in your perspective, just like kind of spending a little bit of time just on this question a little bit deeper. And I'm curious your thoughts. It's almost kind of a leading question, I guess, but just because I think it's just conventional wisdom, or has been, and it's certainly been chipped away a lot over these past 2 years. But like, it sometimes is an afterthought around kind of in the digital environment, or especially for fully online students, that they don't want that. They don't want social engagement. They want to kind of just like, kind of punch their card, like, do the work and be on their own. So I guess, like, what are your points of view on that? The idea that, like, people think it's a presumption of like being in person is either like sort of like inherently social, or you know uh that's what students are looking for from that, like, and they aren't in the online environment. Um, so yeah, just kind of like curious in that like dichotomy.
Yeah, so I think, in terms of learning, like you can think about, like a adult learner, like who has already gone through the learning process, maybe quite self-motivated, and that person might can just pick up a piece of material, a book or whatnot, read themselves and learn from it, right? So a lot of that learning can be self-directed, where the basic assumption is that the learner is motivated to kind of take care of their learning problems on their own. But the vast majority of education is not like that, which is, vast majority of education where learners do want to interact with one another. I mean, this is how we learn. I mean, learning is fundamentally a human activity where, just knowing something, kind of being able to solve a problem or having a hard skill, which you can do probably on your own, is one thing. But actually solving problems in the real world, I mean, it is not just a point solution. I mean, you need to be able to interact with people who have similar interests or experiences and kind of learn from each other as well as from your instructors. So I think the idea that learning can just happen on their own and students will come and interact when they need to is kind of almost making the assumption that it doesn't really really improve your learning experience, which is not true. I mean, based on what we've seen. So I think the real problem, Dustin, is the following, which is how do you really make that happen? I mean, we all remember our best teachers. Like, I mean, if I look back my own experiences, I mean, if I look when I did my undergrad in mechanical engineering, and I've gone through many courses and programs, and I remember my best teacher who were quite active. Like, they were not just coming and lecturing and kind of hoping or assuming that we are learning, but they were actually interacting with us, making those kind of connections happen either through a variety of kind of planned projects in the classroom. We know that, but we also know that that's very hard to do. So, which is why a very few faculties or teachers are able to do those, engaged social learning environments in their courses. And we also know it's very hard to do, make those form outside the learning environment, because then, it demands more time from the students and may or may not be valuable. So, I think the real question is, it is hard to do. How do we make it happen at scale, which is easier, potentially using technology, and something the students will actually like doing or enjoying, or they will get some value out of it. So that is a real problem here. We know people like to connect. We know that, which is why we have social media, which is there is this intrinsic motivation for people to connect with one another. We can always limit if those connections are real or not. I mean, the friends that you're making in Facebook may not be that authentic, but if you can help them form authentic connections, especially when they're in a learning environment, I think it has a tremendous impact on all sorts of outcomes, like not only what they're learning in that subject matter, but how they are progressing from one course to another, how they are retaining, across their learning journey, so that they are not just dropping out or giving up. And even our data shows that. We have done now over like 12 studies on this topic, and we find that every time the students are engaged with one another, all these metrics go up.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like whether it's online or in person, the idea of like social engagement, like, and I think there's just like there's such an opportunity potential in the online environment to utilize tools to help facilitate it and structure it. Because whether it's in person or online, there's just I think there could be this tendency to assume it will happen, where it's just like, hey, we have this class full of students. I'm sure they'll connect and socialize and all that. Like, what do I have to do? Or like, that's just like, I don't know. It's going to be very hard for every student to make those connections. So I think with the right platforms and tools in place that helps to nurture those connections and facilitate them. And I mean, just the idea that all these students are going through the same experience together and having that engagement take place in the LMS where they're spending time and allow for them to connect with their classmates. I mean, it's just maximizing that potential, not assuming it will happen and hoping and just sort of letting it be. It's kind of taking that active role and structuring it to have some assuredness, that it is taking place and everything. So I think, I guess that's like kind of my take sometimes is it's like that in that way it's an afterthought where it's like, well, yeah, I know it's important, but I'm sure they're all like connecting with each other on their own, right? Like it's like, well, maybe I don't know.
That's right. That's right. And you know what? That we see that. I mean, there are. If you look at how a lot of these programs are trying to engage with their students. I mean, the two models that we see, and unfortunately, both of them don't work quite well. And one of the things that you just mentioned, which is, if I build a forum and hope they will come, doesn't happen because there is no real incentive, right? People behave based on incentives, and if even if there is a group of 50 students are together on a forum, and say, hey, just talk to one another. Like, what do you want to talk to one another, right? I mean, firstly, they don't know each other. They might feel it quite awkward to actually start asking question to somebody they do not know, and if it's fully optional, like why would I engage? I mean, it might sound like maybe there is some value there. Maybe I want to connect with some people, but it just kind of the interactions might turn out to be quite awkward in the beginning, and it might just never take off. I think that's one problem we have seen in those kind of forums. The other problem we often see is when it's kind of completely driven by the instructor, which is the traditional discussion board model where the instructor is almost forcing the students to kind of post once, comment twice, or some sort of a rubric or rule that they need to follow to have discussion with one another. And the problem in that kind of model is, even though you might get some responses from the students, but they are not real discussions. They are pretty much forced assignments that they have to do by a certain time. And we see that. I mean, that kind of creates some post and comments, but that really doesn't drive any sort of authentic engagement. And one last thing I'll say there is, if you want to get in, is I think that the solution we have always found is around kind of designing systems which are behavior based. And a lot of that behavior based design has actually been solved. I mean, there's a whole field around game design that we follow in our platform to be able to drive those engagements. So I think there are ways of doing that, but I think it is more than just kind of as you said, like creating an environment and hoping students will come and kind of engage with one another.
Yeah, I mean, on the kind of gamification stuff, I appreciate just because, yeah, it's just such a fun way to sort of motivate and incentivize different things. But yeah, I mean, we've talked about a little bit. I think sort of the kind of like inertia around this, just in terms of sort of the hope of social engagement happening just by the nature of students being in a class together and everything. But there's now, other great tools and options and things out there that can help nurture that and everything. And I'm sure, you've encountered this a lot. Like, so I'm just curious your sort of 2 cents and point of view on, you know, the institutions and faculty, staff, and folks, like their lag in using and integrating these new tools, because obviously you just have to kind of shepherd change and build new habits and everything. But I guess just thoughts on that, because I think that's something that I've thought about a lot. Is I think there's like a lot of conversation about like any tool doing anything where it's just like, oh my gosh, I mean, look at all the possibilities, and a lot of people will accept and acknowledge and agree. But then when you actually kind of have the rubber meet in the road, the idea of actually being like, well, how are we going to like implement this and like get people to actually put it in their courses or whatever. So yeah, I guess just any point of view on that, I'd be definitely curious to hear.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Dustin. I think the challenge is this. I mean, if you really think about the challenge of technology adoption by faculties, there are two big challenges that come to my mind. One is, if you think of faculty today, most faculties are stressed out. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, I was just reading an article by the Chronicle of Higher Education. They posted this whole survey, I believe, where a lot of faculties are getting disengaged, especially during the pandemic and as they're getting out of the pandemic, because we are asking too much from faculties, right? I mean, in one hand, students are disengaging, they're not happy. There are plenty of statistics or numbers around it. They're not showing up in the classrooms, and faculties have this insurmountable job of engaging students where everything around them are changing, and we are relying on them to be able to do everything, right? So that creates this whole stressful situation for faculties where we go and say, okay, now adopt yet another tool and that's going to do these magical things. Is by default like, hey, I don't have the time for it, so why would I adopt technology where I'm already kind of have pretty much disengaged at this point? I mean, that's a huge problem now. The other problem is that you know, for them to really use technology in the right way, it cannot be a bolt-on strategy. So what I mean by that is, like as a faculty, okay, I'm lecturing in person. I'm going to do this lecture online. So let me use a video tool. I mean, that's one. Okay, and I need discussions, so I add a tool. It rarely works. The reason it really works is because most technology, if it has to drive the right outcome, it has to be part of the learning design in some sense. And that's kind of real training and hard work there. So Hard work meaning in terms of really thinking about the technology as part of their learning design. So I think the way we see it work the best is when we essentially explain to faculties that this piece of technology is not going to lead more busy work for them, but actually going to solve some of their problems, like problems around actually having their students engaged, which pretty much every faculty wants that. I mean, I would yet to meet an educator who would say that, oh, my job is to just go and teach, and I don't care about the students learning or not. I mean, I don't think anybody would agree to that. The question becomes how much work I'm going to put in. So if you can say that you can put in far less amount of work, like in our user base, we see they're saving about two-thirds of their time they spend in trying to engage students when they use our technology like us. So being able to show that data and being able to explain that, and getting that buy-in so that they allow us to design e-learning into their learning process so that it's no longer a bolt-on, but actually going to transform their teaching practices, is when the results start showing up. And it's almost like a light bulb. Like once the results show up and once they see that, you know what, if I can make this change and this is going to be a much better world for me, personally, as a much more fulfilled educator, as well as I'm going to have more time to do the things I love to do, that's when they really truly adopt technology. And that is hard to do. And we are seeing more of that though. I mean, I would say, Dustin, I mean, 3-4 years back, pre-pandemic, given some of these tools were not a must have, and people used to think like, okay, you know what, I can just get by doing what I do today. I think there is enough frustration in the faculty base now. They're open to kind of really have that dialogue. And we are seeing that happen. I mean, in our client base, we are seeing a lot of progress in that direction right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just grateful that there has been a little bit of a paradigm shift in acceptance of the value of social engagement and the learning environments and everything. So, um, yeah, I mean, and it definitely makes a lot of sense what you're saying too. Or like, I would imagine a scenario that may be common is that you might have a faculty member or staff, whomever, that just gets it, and if they can pilot it, even just like in a course, and then like you kind of have a proof of concept, that can kind of go a long way with convincing, because yeah, there's would be that kind of inertia and skepticism, and not really being sure of the reality of what it would mean to implement something new. And yeah, I mean, just the idea of being able to have something that makes the student's experience better and does not create like a huge amount of additional work for a faculty member is uh yeah, it's like that's the goal. That is what tools like these do. So uh yeah, that's definitely like the target you have to aim for to get people to be like, oh, okay, all right, like let's do this.
Yeah, yeah,
um
no, 100%. I think you mentioned pilots. I think pilots are, one of the issues in, this is something probably we have created, as a sector overall, as an edtech sector, is there is a significant amount of distrust between faculties and edtech companies, sometimes institutions, where it's almost like, the edtech companies are for profits and they're going to go after and just try to make money and they don't care about learning. And as a faculty, my job is to protect that. So I think that the reason it's probably there is because I'm sure there has been some practices that was followed in the past that didn't really write the right results, and people may have felt hurt or brushed out in the wrong way. But that's not the case, though. I mean, now if you see, of course, I'm biased about my company, but if I look at other companies in the space, there are a lot of innovation that's happening, which is actually driving real results for faculties in the classroom. So I think part of the solution here is to kind of rebuild that trust, so that it's almost like kind of at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the students are coming in as they always want to in higher education, and they are getting the right value so that they're getting paid, or whatever tuition they're paying, they see that, okay, I'm actually getting a lot more value than just kind of a piece of content that I probably could have downloaded in YouTube or whatnot. So they don't get that feeling. It's a lot more engaging, they get more value. If we can create that experience, I mean, that has to be in a partnership mode, because one school, one institution cannot create that. So to your point, I think pilots to kind of really show the value to faculties and kind of being open to being kind of studied probably by some sort of third parties are important parts of kind of getting these technologies out there.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, well, I mean, this work has come a long way, but I think there's so much momentum now with just the adoption of uh, more digital learning and hybrid learning and all these different things, and I think really investing in that experience for students. So, from your point of view, I'm sure you just do have a very unique, interesting vantage point. What are you looking forward to with your work here? Because I think certainly, yeah, you've learned a lot in terms of like implementing and managing change and everything. But yeah, I'm sure there's still a lot to come on the horizon. So yeah, what are you looking forward to?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. I mean, personally, of course, I have my own desires, but if I look at where we are, right, in this sector, like higher education or education overall, my real hope is that we know that there is going to be digital transformation happening in higher education. So the reason we know that is because the students are not the same students we had 5 years, 10 years back. They have a lot of opportunities. They can go pretty much anywhere, and or not even go to college and kind of study on their own, because there are tools available now. We have this internet now where you can pretty much search anything in Google and learn about it. So defining the value of higher education in a way which is focused on the students, and I think kind of really thinking about how we can use technology or edtech specifically to drive better learning. A lot of the times when I hear about technology, it kind of gets clubbed into these buzzwords like online learning or hybrid learning, as if like, oh, it's a new way of teaching. At the end of the day, it's not. Like, the whole world is online right now. Like, think about COVID. Like, we are pretty much online 100%. There's nothing
Hmm.
like online. I mean, even if a student goes to a physical classroom, they're there for like 5-10% of their time. Their entire lives are digital now. So there's nothing called online learning or hybrid learning. It's just learning. And the question becomes, how can we improve the overall learning experience so that students find it valuable, so that they will actually say, you know what, I'm going to spend the time to and the money to be in this program, and not and at the at the same time make the faculty experience better as well, because I think that's going to be a big challenge if we don't really make some course correction here. So that's what I love to see. I mean, I think it would be some sort of partnerships with the right players. Like, for example, we work with you guys, I know, and we work with other schools, and kind of really coming together and having these conversations in an open way, and kind of really trying to understand each other's point of view and see if we can work together, as opposed to kind of not trusting each other in some sense. I don't see that that mistrust is there broadly, but I think we need to address it in a much more focused way, saying how can we build more trust so that we can come together and solve these problems in a meaningful way.
Hmm. Yeah. That is a helpful reminder because it's definitely like a new thing for a lot of people of like teaching and learning in an online environment. But it's like almost like, I guess when you're saying that, it's almost like you would wish that like the words were flipped, that it's like learning that happens to take place in an online environment versus like online, like that it's like, yeah, I don't know, some like radically different or, thing that it's like, no, like learning is learning. And, you know, ultimately, yeah, that there's more, I think, similar, whether it's in person or online, than different, and it's just kind of pivoting, and different tools that you're using, but the same value set uh, is ultimately going to be still important, however that learning and teaching happens. So, um,
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
that's a good
that's a
reminder.
great way of saying that. It's the same thing. I think, which is why I think there is a lot of even fear in a lot of faculties. Like, I can imagine one thing. I mean, one thing I'll just end by is that we speak to so many professors, teachers, and they're teaching in a variety of contexts. And there's a lot of fear right now because, people feel, I mean, we have this issue with A lot of them are not getting paid well. A lot of them are doing jobs that feel like busy work. They got into teaching, but they're not really getting that fulfillment from it because of a variety of reasons, not in their control. And I think if we can kind of say that, okay, at the end of the day, let us just focus on maximizing that learning outcome. Like, if somebody decides to go to a school or a program and they decide to spend 10 hours, those 10 hours should be maximized
Hmm.
using whatever tools are needed. Like, for example, it could be in person if that's possible and cost efficient. If not, using the right online tools. But that's what we want to maximize on. And I think everybody wins in that environment because the innovation happens, and the faculty who have they just move from one way of teaching to another way, and there's some learning involved, and I'm sure all of us can go through that. So I think we just have to kind of frame the problem that way, as opposed to kind of often the problem is framed as like, hey, what's your online enrollment? Are you growing? Are students coming? Because it almost feels like the focus is more on the aspects of learning which are not that valuable. I mean, it's like, but not really focusing on the true learning experience, which is so much valuable now, and which is where a lot of the problems are, which is why students are getting disengaged right now. Yeah, I mean, that's a lots of the lofty goals you can say. I mean, we are just one
Hmm.
company. I mean, of course, I cannot do it on my own for sure. I think it's a matter of having these conversations and getting the right folks at the table.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think like, I think of just sort of like, modern higher ed and teaching and learning and all that. Like, it's just this like Voltron of like, different pieces plugging into each other to create, something that's, greater than the sum of its parts, or, however you want to kind of say it. But, it does take a lot of different people and tools and things like that to create a really, positive and effective and engaging learning environment and everything. And that, um, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm sort of biased, but yeah, like the sometimes like overly emphasized focus on, yeah, just like more and more and more students. It's like, sure, but like if you give them like a positive experience in their learning environment, then you're retaining them and likely getting like more positive word of mouth, or just like that sort of thing. So it's, don't entirely do one too much at the cost of the other, certainly, but uh
100%, 100%.
I
And actually, a lot of the things that we are talking about here, Dustin, I feel is like almost like given in some other sectors, which is non-education sectors, where like, if you look at the consumer sector or e-commerce and elsewhere, like if you have a product that's not great, no amount of marketing is going to make it successful, right? And even if I
Mhm.
go and get like 10 customers or 100 customers today because I did really good marketing, it's just going to eventually fail if the product itself is not providing the right value for the customers. And higher education, of course, there was this advantage that students will go there just for the name or the degree, or they had no other option, or there's some other things in place. So that is changing. I mean, now, if that is changing, I think just trying to do better marketing and trying to, kind of get the students is, of course, that's important. Like any business, we do that too. But at the end of the day, I think the real problem is the learning experience, and kind of really having some investment and focus in that area is super important. I do believe that, though, it's not just important, but that's where the next level of competition is going to happen, because people who are going to deliver better experiences are basically going to win, because those students are going to be their champions. And if that doesn't happen, it's just going to naturally fail, maybe much faster than it had failed in the past.
That's definitely kind of my hot take as well. Is that I think that that's going to be new kind of competitive edge is uh, yeah, investing more in the student experience and retaining the students that you do have. But um, yeah, so I mean, as we wind down, we always like to give an opportunity if there are resources that you'd want to share, resources of your own, or uh, any other things that are kind of catching your eye and grabbing your attention, stuff that we can put in the show notes.
In terms of resources, and I've been having these conversations with very interesting people lately. So two kind of books that I recently read, I think I found quite valuable. One is by Joshua Kim and Edward Maloney, and they wrote a book called Learning Innovation and the Future of Higher Education. Very interesting book. I think it
Mhm.
captures some of these ideas around access and quality is the two big tenets, and the quality part has been overlooked for a long time, honestly. And and that's becoming more important. So if you're interested to kind of see what other schools are doing, I found that book quite helpful. The other book I recently came across was this book on active learning online by Stephen Gosselin. And Stephen has been kind of almost like a 30-year professional an educator himself. He's a well-known educator in active learning. And I found that book pretty interesting because he goes pretty deep into how our mind work or our brain work to kind of really figure out what kind of active learning techniques might work for our students. So, and he actually touches on gameful learning approaches as well in his book. So, very interesting book. So, it's called Active Learning Online by Stephen Gosselin. That's useful.
All right, very good stuff. We'll link out to those for folks to check out. And then we will end as we always do. If you have a final thought or call to action on this topic to wrap up the episode.
Firstly, thanks for the invitation. I think my final thought is, more conversation. I think what we really need to have is folks who are working in the space in a different ways, and maybe in the fringes, maybe in the core. But I think we need to have more conversation around how we kind of innovate these, this next generation learning design and kind of universities or programs that we are building. Rather than just kind of following the old template, which we know, doesn't quite work, and spending money behind them may not be always the right solution. So, yeah, my call to action is let's have more conversation. And if you want to talk to me, you can find me in LinkedIn is probably the best way to find me. Just go and search for my name, Shaunak Roy. And I'm there. Message me. I'm happy to chat. If you want to learn about the company that I run, Yellowdig, you can also find us in LinkedIn or go to yellowdig.com and reach out to us. Definitely would love to have a conversation. And we do have a limited number of free pilots that we do for institutions if you do qualify. So if you're interested in trying us out without any cost, would love to talk about that as well. And you can contact us through our website.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, we'll have ways, absolutely. All the ways that you mentioned to connect with you and your team there, Yellowdig, to keep the conversation going. But yeah, I mean, this is really great stuff. Love geeking out about this topic, and so grateful to you for taking some time out to talk a little bit about it. So yeah, just thank you so much for all that you shared.
Yeah, no, thanks. Enjoy the conversation, Dustin. Thanks for the invitation. And yeah, look, if you want to chat more, reach out to me. And I don't know if you have used Yellowdig or you have seen Yellowdig. I mean, if you want to learn more about anything about us, definitely reach out. Love to talk more.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.